to comment on before we continue, and there may be some other questions. I think your question was whether HPB read these materials and so on. One of the there are many mysteries connected with the life of HPB. At least I think there are. She says in one place that she spent 7 years in Tibet. Careful scholars, researchers, have never been able to account for certainly seven consecutive years in Tibet. On the other hand, there are years which are really not accounted for in her life.
I just happened to read yesterday that Colonel Olcott had the idea that when she was wounded in the Battle of Nantan,
yes,
and that she actually another great initiate entered her body to a certain extent.
This is frequently pointed out.
His idea, but it was perhaps his identity.
Yes. This is part of her life that there is a record, historical record, that she fought with Garibaldi and in Italy, and that she was wounded in the battle, badly wounded. Now, there is a thesis, I think Boris Dezerkov has referred to this also in his writings on HPB, and others have referred to it, that an entity took over the body at that particular time. Who was the initiate? This again touches upon, a very great mystery, which is known technically as tulku, T-U-L-K-U, in the Tibetan, in which the consciousness steps aside for the admission of another consciousness,
she never lost her own.
But the consciousness is never lost. It is not mediumship. It is not channeling. It is not in any way this kind of thing, but a voluntary, knowing, stepping aside of one's consciousness for another consciousness to come in and to use the vehicle. This is a very technical term. In Sanskrit it is avesha. It is different from the principle of avatar. All of these are technical terms which are very well known in the Eastern system, and actually were well known in the Gnostic systems, but have been removed, and most of the traces of them have been removed even. Although I must admit I am not completely familiar with the Nag Hammadi library, but I understand from those who are, people like Dr. Stephen Heller, that there are veiled references in some of the books that were discovered in the Nag Hammadi library, veiled references that could be the same principle. And it could be that, therefore, that particular entity utilizing the vehicle knowingly may have spent 7 years. On the other hand, HPB was not, she didn't have a PhD from an acknowledged university. This is not the point. But that she was an initiate, that she was a very highly evolved individual, there can be no question. She was unique. In the Mahatma letters, the statement is made that they searched a century to find an individual whose vehicles would be useful in this whole purpose. There are a number of statements about HPB that in themselves are extremely interesting if one reads the Mahatma letters. And the very fact that, in fact, Boris Dezerkov has pointed out that every initiate who is sent out from within the precincts of Shambhala is in a state of being a psychological cripple. And this she is called in the letters, a psychological cripple. It is said in one of the letters that one of her principles had to be left behind. And many people have puzzled over that, but there is a very easy explanation, because there is a letter of A.O. Hume published in the letters of HPB to A.P. Sinnott buried in that volume, in which the master has put in the margin or in between the lines that perhaps it was not one principle, but sort of the cream of all of them. That there was a magnetic link, in other words, and I think that's the easiest way to describe it, which left her, so far as the physical operation of a vehicle, a psychological cripple. Boris has pointed out that in the usual course of events, an initiate would spend altogether too much pranic energy keeping one physical body going in one land and another one in some other land. He usually dies, discards his own body, and assumes the body of another highly evolved entity. In the case of H.P. Blavatsky, the vacancy or wedge created by the temporary abstraction of that portion of her consciousness was occupied from time to time by various adepts, such as Moria, K.H., etc. Sometimes the gap was bridged by her own higher self, the Argoides. At other times it was occupied by a very high initiate, vastly higher than the Mahatmas we have heard of. This initiate was, or is, a Slavonian by his latest incarnation. And it is precisely because of his peculiar type of psychomentality, due to his present racial stock, that the messenger of the present era had to be chosen, if possible at all, from among Slavic people. So there is, admittedly, many mysteries connected with all of this. Much, much to be studied.
So the physical genes do have something to do with it?
The physical genes obviously do. So to continue with Boris Dezerkov, who probably did more research than almost anyone, except for now an individual, Anita Atkins, who is doing considerable research. This permitted for H.P. Blavatsky to be attuned to his vibratory rate, as it were. Still at other times, the vacancy was filled with a power for which it would be advisable to reserve the term of HPV, which emanated from the silent watcher of the globe via our Lord, the Chohan, the Mahachohan, or the chief, spoken of by the masters. Boris, for many years, edited a small journal known as Theosophia. And I know that we have here someone who's collecting all of these archival materials and making them available in Xeroxed or reproduced form. What would you call it, Ernest?
We've reproduced all the collected works of Theosophia into 4 bound volumes for anybody who's available.
So 4 bound volumes. These are available from the library in Edmonton in Canada, and very valuable. This is in Theosophia for January, February of 1948. So perhaps the Krotona Library and other theosophical libraries will take advantage of their availability and order from the Pelletiers in Edmonton the bound volumes of Theosophia. In any event, Boris continues, bear in mind this. 1, somebody was physically born in 1831. A normal birth, like any other child. The entity gradually returning from its devachanic sleep. This incarnation process went on for a number of years. 2, sooner or later it was interrupted by the fact that this entity withdrew, and the personal vehicle was occupied by someone else, an advanced someone else. When did this take place? Subject to speculation, and maybe your intuition may supply the answer or answers. More than one is possible. 3, later on, this entity, now occupying a borrowed body and psyche, relinquished a certain portion of its inner consciousness as a lien upon it by and from the administration at Shambhala, L-I-E-N, sort of a lien against your car or household. A very complex thing, to be sure. I think that's as well stated as we can as to who she was. Very interesting. It is doubtful that she read Tibetan or Greek. She, it is said, learned her English from the Mahatma K.H. And therefore one finds a certain similarity in the expressions. It's
You remember Boris said at the centenary meeting that she learned languages very quickly.
Yes.
That
Yes.
if she lived someplace for 2 or 3 years, she could speak the language quite
Yes,
well.
that she learned languages. Virginia's reminding me that of the statement by Boris, that she learned languages very quickly. If she lived in a certain area, she spoke that language very fluently. So she may have known Tibetan while she was in Tibet, but then she no longer knew it. It was as though this was an unusual capacity, but when she was in an area, she learned the language, she could speak it, she was fluent in it, and then it was set aside. One of the remarkable faculties, perhaps one of the undeveloped faculties. Margaret?
I heard that she was also influenced by the master Hilarion.
Probably there were several. There's no doubt there were several. Principally her own master, who was known as the Master Moria, and his great brother, the Master Kutumi. But there were several. There were Drawcool, certainly, probably Hilarion, probably others. Yes, there's no question. Probably many. Because she represented, in a sense, she was the living link in this world. And this was what they needed, as it were. A living link who was herself. She was not an unconscious medium. She knew precisely. Although there were times when she said in her normal brain consciousness, I'm not quite sure what this is all about. It's an area I'm not really know about. And in some of her letters one gets this. I'm made to write this, but I'm not quite sure what it's about. That may not be so unusual. Sometimes, I know at university I sometimes answered questions and could get a very good grade on the paper. I wasn't quite sure what I was saying, but it sounded very good. It sort of gave back what the textbooks said, and I came out all right. So, that's not all that unusual to put something down and then not be quite sure what you have afterwards. The fact, however, that she certainly was in this whole tradition. She opens the proem of Volume 1 with words that I think simply, I used to call them mind-expanding. Today, I suppose I should say they blow your mind, which is the contemporary way of saying it. But they certainly awaken, I think they awaken a kind of almost racial memory in us, if I can put it that way. They awaken within us, if we're really open to them, that collective memory of Carl Jung's collective unconscious, a kind of, oh yes, that somehow rings true. At least this is for me. These words, an archaic manuscript, a collection of palm leaves made impermeable to water, fire, and air by some specific unknown process, is before the writer's eye. She's seeing it. She doesn't say that it's physically present, but it's before the writer's eye. On the first page is an immaculate white disc within a dull black ground. On the following page, the same disc, but with a central point. The first, the student knows to represent cosmos in eternity, before the reawakening of still slumbering energy, the emanation of the Word in later systems. The point in the hitherto immaculate disc, space and eternity in pralaya, denotes the dawn of differentiation. It is the point in the mundane egg, the germ within the latter which will become the universe, the all, the boundless periodical cosmos. This germ being latent and active periodically and by turns. The one circle is divine unity from which all proceeds, whither all returns. Its circumference, a forcibly limited symbol in view of the limitation of the human mind, indicates the abstract, ever incognizable presence and its plane the universal soul, although the two are one. And this is, of course, what distinguishes this metaphysic from all other metaphysical systems. The two are one. You read, this is the symbol of the circle, a forcibly limited symbol in view of the limitation of the human mind. Because however you picture a circle, you can start with a small circle, you can have as large a circle as you can imagine. There is a limit, isn't there? The moment you say circle, there has to be somewhere a limitation by the very nature of the human mind. Otherwise, it's just blankness that goes on forever, isn't it? You see. And so she says it's forcibly limited. Indicates the abstract, ever incognizable presence and its plane. That is its reflection, the universal soul, although the two are one. So there is no distinction between the ever incognizable presence and its reflection. They're one. This is what marks the Theosophical metaphysics as Advaita, non-dual, not two.
No difference between nirvana and samsara.
No difference between Nagarjuna, the great Buddhist teacher, nirvana and samsara are the same. The universal is the same as the particular. This, in one sense, we now have in contemporary thought a word for it. It's a holograph, isn't it? A hologram, isn't it? In which the part reveals the whole. Any particular part in a hologram reveals the whole. The whole is present. So she says, only the face of the disk, being white and the ground all around black, shows clearly that its plane is the only knowledge, dim and hazy though it still is, that is attainable by man. So it's a marvelous system, you see, that she has presented to us. And so this doctrine, the cis-Himalayan, trans-Himalayan, according to Tissot, as I quoted from the esoteric writings, a wonderful statement which he has made. There is a doctrine which is the real foundation of all these, that is, of all the different systems of philosophy, which he has enumerated, which is the real foundation of all these, and which explains the secret of the various systems of philosophy and harmonized their teachings. This doctrine existed even before the Vedas were compiled and studied by our ancient rishis in connection with the Hindu scriptures. It is attributed to, and he has Maha with a series of dots, omissions, and then in parenthesis, the very title of the present chief of the esoteric Himalayan Brotherhood, which of course is not even the title is given to us, let alone the name. So a knowledge of that basic doctrine, according to Subarot, was necessary to throw light on the Vedas and the Upanishads. And she, HPB herself in Isis tells us that the ancient adepts of India learned the knowledge of the occult powers of nature possessed by the inhabitants of the lost Atlantis, and was appended by them to the esoteric doctrine taught by the residents of the sacred island, who were instructed by the sons of God and who were initiated in the divine doctrine of pure revelation. The sacred island, of course, being, it is said, once in the Golden Sea. Whether these are figurative or actual is not important, it seems to me, because what is being said is that humanity has never been without this teaching, nor has humanity ever been without its teachers, those wise ones, and that therefore the various religions of the world, as HPB points out, the various systems, which, and she makes the statement somewhere, that all of these various, I don't see it right now, but all of the various religions are but aspects then of this primordial doctrine, this underlying teaching, which came to us from previous systems, from previous humanities, has been, therefore the tradition has always been present. But it is said that for us, it is necessary then that it now become, that we now carry it a step further. And so, yes, here it is. It's perhaps desirable to state unequivocally that the teachings, however fragmentary and complete, contained in these volumes belong neither to the Hindu, the Zoroastrian, the Chaldean, nor to the Egyptian religion, neither to Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, nor Christianity exclusively. The secret doctrine is the essence of all these. Sprung from it in their origins, the various religious schemes are now made to merge back into their original element, out of which every mystery and dogma has grown, developed, and become materialized. So the religions have sprung from this original source. Are there any other questions or comments anyone wants to make?
I have a question.
Yes.
In your statement here, you say each one of us must win our own immortality. That makes a lot of sense, but how does that reconcile with the bodhisattva ideal of everybody having salvation and so forth?
Yes, you see, from one point of view, it's said that everybody will eventually achieve. Now, what is meant by everybody? Because the Mahatma letters also indicate that, is it souls perish by the millions or something like that? There's a...
That's the personal.
Personal, yes.
But the monad never.
The monad never perishes, but the monad may indeed defer, as it were, or sort of sit out, fail in a class, and then must come in at a later cycle. Because the cycles continue, as HPB puts it, without conceivable beginning or imaginable end. So we really don't know. We like beginnings and endings, you know, we do, and of course here we follow them rather strictly. Especially when it's being recorded and all the rest, one follows time limits very strictly. So it's very difficult to think of this. But to achieve the, what shall we say, to achieve the goal that has been set for our humanity, it is indeed our effort. And in fact, HPB says in the first volume, it happens to be one of my favorite statements, which I have used again and again. It's part of the third fundamental proposition, page 17 of the proem. The pivotal doctrine of the esoteric philosophy admits no privileges or special gifts in man, save those won by his own ego. That is, that we have to do it. We have to win our immortality through personal effort and merit, throughout a long series of metempsychoses and reincarnations. Here is the pivotal doctrine, and all of this material is given to us, it seems to me. The metaphysics, and just recently I had a letter from a member who said he wasn't at all interested in the Secret Doctrine and Mahatma letters. What he's interested in is practical work. Theosophy is just practical work in the three objects of the society. Well, I think that's an extremely funny statement.
And Mahatma K.H. said that he had struggled for 25
Yes.
years just to keep his place.
Yes, the Mahatma, Virginia reminds me of the marvelous statement in the Mahatma letters that he struggled just for 25 years just to keep his place in the ranks. But what I'm getting at is that the metaphysics is important because we work from a certain point of view, and a meaningful point of view, not just the surface work, as it were. And so indeed we do. This points to the fact, this is the pivotal doctrine, is that we win our immortality. And so it is a way of life. And this is the testability of these principles in that sense. The verification of them is that we have to live them. And that's why the book is written. The volumes are written as they are, as I've been stressing. Because that alone awakens this spiritual perception, this insight that can come about. This has to do with the manner of the presentation. As I say, it would have been so much easier, we could say, if indeed you could pull out all of these fundamental principles and tenets and just say, well, why didn't she just say these in an orderly way? Why all of this material? Why the use of the stanzas, which have been very difficult to identify, really to understand, even if one accepts that, well, they must be statements somewhere, they must be around somewhere. Even though scholars until recently, with wider knowledge, said this she must have made up. Why does she use these stanzas? Because it awakens in us a certain kind of knowing, a new mode of thought. Really, it does something if we're really open to it. And that enables us to make this effort, it seems to me. So I see no contradiction, Bill, between the fact that we win our immortality and ultimately every monad will achieve, whether in this particular cycle, this manvantara, or in some future cycle. But it seems to me that we have this responsibility, and this, of course, is the Bodhisattva ideal, which is clearly set before us by HPB. This is a particular path. This is a unique, this is its unique teaching, that it is a particular path, known as the Bodhisattva path. That is the path of compassion, the path of the realization that no one can achieve for himself alone. That it is of benefit to all living things, all sentient beings. And the other.
And even if you have to step out and wait for another cycle, that time, in our sense of time, seems ionic.
Yes.
It's just like perhaps being in deep sleep. We don't measure time.
No, I think again one has to be very careful on this matter of time. You know, it's ionic time, and certainly you know how much time elapses when you have a good sound night's sleep.
It may be going on at the same time, probably.
Yes. Yes, it may be going on at the same time. We don't know. Margaret?
There are very rare cases when a monad can be lost.
Oh, yes.
Or is it merely postponed to another manvantara?
Well, it's said that there can be the reabsorption. And of course there is the teaching concerning Avicii, the eighth sphere, and so on. A very, again, mysterious teaching, very mystical teaching. A very interesting one to pursue, where it is said there is indeed a kind of returning to the primordial monadic soup, if you like to call it that. Yes, and that in rare cases that this does happen, and can happen.
And it is not, again...
I don't think any of us have to worry about it, however.
It was so rare, there was no really much point in bringing it up.
Yes, that's right. Yes, in one of the Mahatma letters, that it's so rare that it really is not much point in pursuing it.
And in that case, not even in another manvantara, is that
No,
right?
that's what is indicated, but I really don't think that we need to be concerned about that, as I said. Unfortunately, and the Mahatmas indicate it is extremely, extremely rare. Any other points? Well, let's look then very briefly at the structure of the Secret Doctrine. It is, as I say, the presentation of principles, starting with the three fundamental propositions, which she says, of course, everyone must keep very clearly in mind. And she advised her students in the notes that were left to us by one of her students, Captain Bowen. She says that one must begin with that. One must indeed start with the fundamental propositions. It is said that by Bowen that she told her own students that reading the Secret Doctrine page by page, as one reads any other book, will only end in confusion. Well, I think we all know that if we've attempted it. So she said the first thing to do, even if it takes years, is to get some grasp of the three fundamental principles given in the proem. Now, one can read these pages and say, well, why should it take years to get a grasp of these? But if you really analyze them, really look at them very closely, you will find that it does take years in the sense that we're continually gaining new insights into their meaning. I have always been struck by the fact that HKB says, for example, with regard to the first fundamental proposition, what is it? Right here. That it is, oh yes, the Secret Doctrine establishes three fundamental propositions. And she says, an omnipresent, eternal, boundless, and immutable principle on which all speculation is impossible. And then she proceeds to spend the longest time on any of the propositions on this first one. Not speculation, however, because she says, to render these ideas clearer to the general reader, let him set out with the postulate that there is one absolute reality which antecedes all manifested conditioned being. The rootless root, devoid of all attributes, be-ness rather than being. And this be-ness, then, because by nature, we want to symbolize it. We have to see it in some way. And so she says, can be symbolized, is symbolized under two aspects. Absolute abstract space, representing bare subjectivity, the one thing which no human mind can either exclude from any conception or conceive of by itself. On the other, absolute abstract motion, representing unconditioned consciousness. So we have then this axiom, a metaphysical one absolute be-ness, which is symbolized then by bare subjectivity, bare objectivity. Motion, space, motion. Later she points out that the third in this symbolism, because the moment you have two, you have a third. The moment there is two, you have a third, which is the relationship, is duration, from which time arises, right, naturally. So bare subjectivity ultimately densifies as matter. Bare motion, so space then, it becomes then that which is the container, as it were, the field in which all other fields arise, and the localizations within those fields ultimately are the human being, consciousness. But consciousness is bare, is motion.
Yeah.
Unconditioned
Yes,
consciousness then becomes consciousness operating through those localizations, or indeed identifying with those fields. And so when we pull them apart, and we do, as principles, as planes, these are fields which are all the time here present. They're not somewhere else. While we may often picture them in a kind of ladder formation and so on, they are all the time here present because they are the representation of that ultimate reality. And so, naturally, the second proposition, that the eternity of the universe in toto as a boundless plane or field, periodically the playground of numberless universes, and the eternity of the pilgrim within that. So the localization is a periodic localization. And we begin to see that in terms of our own lives even. We have, as it were, shall I say, we're periodically here and then we move somewhere else and so on. So there is a periodicity, as she says. The second assertion is the absolute universality of that law of periodicity. But there is this fundamental identity, which now is stressed in the third proposition. A fundamental identity of all souls with the universal oversoul, and the obligatory pilgrimage through the cycle of incarnation or necessity, in accordance with cyclic and karmic law. Well, one can indeed spend years, and I think this is the difficulty. It really is years. She advised her students then, and it's interesting, to go to the recapitulation, the numbered items in the summing up to Volume 1, and then take the preliminary notes of Volume 2 and its conclusion. Now, one can say, well, why didn't she put that all together then as the primer? Because in each case, all that follows is substantiating these fundamental principles. And so she gives us the principles. They're outworking in terms of the stanzas, which we'll look at a little more thoroughly tomorrow, and then sums up for us, and then in connection with anthropogenesis shows their working out in terms of the human, who is indeed, the human becomes then the archetype for our system. The heavenly man is the archetype. All beings, therefore, as she suggests, all life tends towards the human. That is, tends towards this equilibrium focused at manas. And so Bowen points out that she talked a great deal about the fundamental principle. And she said, if one imagines that one is going to get a satisfactory picture of the constitution of the universe from the Secret Doctrine, one will get only confusion from its study. It is not meant to give any such final verdict on existence, but to lead towards the truth. Again, a mode of thought, to lead us to an understanding. And so she said, come to the Secret Doctrine without any hope of getting the final truth of existence from it, or with any idea other than seeing how far it may lead towards the truth. And observe the following rules. No matter what one may study in the Secret Doctrine, let the mind hold fast as the basis of its ideation to the following ideas: the fundamental unity of all existence. The second idea to hold fast: there is no dead matter. The third basic idea is that man is the microcosm. And the fourth and last basic idea, that expressed in the great Hermetic axiom, it really sums up and synthesizes all the others. As is the inner, so is the outer. As is the great, so is the small. As it is above, so it is below. The law of analogy, correspondences. Absolutely essential. And so she said, no matter what one takes as study in the Secret Doctrine, one must correlate it with those basic ideas. It's interesting, in one of the Mahatma letters, letter 13, the Master said regarding the method of study of this occult doctrine, in our doctrine you will find necessary the synthetic method. You remember we talked yesterday about this word synthesis, which is in the subtitle of the Secret Doctrine. That is to say, to blend the macrocosm, no, you will have to embrace the whole. That is to say, to blend the macrocosm and microcosm together before you are enabled to study the parts separately or analyze them with profit to your understanding. Cosmology is the physiology of the universe spiritualized, for there is but one law. What a marvelous statement. Cosmology is the physiology of the universe spiritualized. But there has to be a blending then. And again I come back to the mode of thought. Consequently, the method used in the Secret Doctrine, and this is why the stanzas, is what is known in the East as the Sutra method. This is a very common method in the East, particularly in India, the Sutra method. And indeed, this is the basic method of the Upanishads, of all the Yoga Sutras. It's the fundamental method, and this is the method, therefore, in which she was trained. And it is, in fact, it is primary to Western thought also in terms of Christianity. If one looks at the sayings of Jesus, for example, these are sutras. These are threads on which are strung all of the ideas. And the word sutra is, of course, just the word thread. We have it in our English word suture, you know. So it's a word that should be familiar to us. It's not just a Sanskrit word. It is in it. We have it in English. And so it's a thread. And the stanzas, it seems to me, this is why she used them. Not because they were necessary to, in one sense, to give us the fundamental principles, but because they were the thread on which could be then developed all of this system. But if you have the thread, you know, then you have the key to it, don't you? If you some of the women will realize if you've ever either let down or shortened the hem of a dress, and you try to take out the old hem, and you find the thread that will unravel the whole, you know. Sometimes you can't find it, and you're forever snipping away to find that thread. Well, this is the same thing. Once you get a hold of the thread in this, the whole thing unravels.
It is often said that there are two keys, the silver key and the golden key.
Yes.
Which key are you talking about?
Well, I think this is the key that underlies both silver and gold. Really, is the key. Of course, the law of analogy she points to again and again. Maybe that's
Do you
the
find
golden
any
key.
correspondence in our idea of epigrams, or, for instance, in
Oh, yes.
the Marcus Aurelius?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, Marcus Aurelius in the Meditations. I think again and again.
Sort of the
this is-
same idea.
Yes. What would you say, Ernie? Is it the silver or the gold?
Well, I would think that it's the silver cord, the silver
Silver
thread.
key.
But
Silver.
the esoteric interpretation, after you
Yes.
know the silver,
Yes,
is the esoteric understanding of it is the golden.
is the gold. That probably is true, that this is the silver key, and when you understand it, you have the golden key. Yes, that's probably true. But it is interesting. We have it in epigrams, we have it in proverbs, we have it in the sayings, the mystic sayings, again and again. So it's not unknown to the West, but it is certainly very well known in the East, in India. You have it in Lao Tzu, of course, the great text of China, which is a sutra text, isn't it? Every phrase, every sentence it unravels into larger and larger meanings. And I think this is really why she used this particular document, because it gave the mystic background to the whole setting. Well, I guess that's it for today. Tomorrow we will be looking at something else.